for this session on Atmanirbhar Bharat to lead global growth. And we have a very exciting panel. Shweta will be moderating the session, but let me just quickly take you through what are the expected perspectives on this panel. As India, we heard from Mr. Amitabh Khan yesterday, arrived in a very James Bond kind of a moment, which, at the full consensus for the outcomes and the communique. I think some things that came out and were also debated in the session, in the preceding session was, are the geopolitical uncertainties going to be such that they will not be factored in by a lot of us as public policy practitioners, or will be factored in by us in the economic transitions our corporates and the country is going to make? And there is a feeling that we have a lot that India can leverage today, from a demographic profile to being a part of this golden constellation of the four South emerging economies: Indonesia, India, Brazil, South Africa, that have really set an agenda alongside UN having made an agenda to reset the SDGs. So is this our moment to leverage our Atmanirbharta to make a global impact, in terms of a demographic profile, in terms of the women who are really coming to the 50% rightful position in the economy, and so much more. So with this, I'm going to hand over to Shweta to take us through the session and moderate it. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Vinita. And they say save the best for the last. So I'm hoping that this session will have an impactful, you will be an impactful one for each one of you. And it's really an honor and a pleasure for me to be moderating this session on an Atmanirbhar Bharat to lead global growth, and of course a power-packed panel as it is, given that we've got Secretary West, Ministry of External Affairs, Sanjay Verma with us, and of course Secretary of MeitY, the Ministry of Electronics and IT, S. Krishnan, on this panel, and stalwarts from PAFI, Vinita and Bharat, and of course Kaustav accompanying me in moderating this session. Let's first set the tone of what we're trying to achieve today on this panel. I think India's stupendous success that we've seen as part of the G20 presidency has really brought a lot of global spotlight on India. Is India now going to play an even more important role in leading global growth? Is India going to be seen as the one country that will take forward that vision around digital economy, MSME access, addressing climate change and finance, inclusive international trade? But more importantly, how do we walk the talk? How do we turn that G20 vision and into real outcomes? And how do we continue to play that important role on the global stage? I think those are some of the important questions that are already being asked. And of course, there will be a role that different stakeholders will need to play in realizing this collective aspiration. Let me start by actually bringing in Secretary Verma here to set the stage for us on what is really happening, and why is this moment an important moment for India. On one hand, we understand that there is just too much action on the geopolitical front. I mean, there is just so much that is going on across geopolitically. And yet, we have within us an opportunity where India has emerged as a leader on some key parameters, turning it into an economic superpower of sorts, where we have established clear models where India can establish and show its global growth. How do you think we are positioned right now, Secretary Verma, to be able to take advantage in some ways and ride on what is really going on globally?
Good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity. Pleasure to be here. When we were growing up in university in the 80s, at that point of time, probably 90s, you never heard slogans, positive slogans to energize us or India. The first positive slogan was, I think, President Kalam saying that we have to be a developed country by X date. Before that, you had slogans, but they were rather negative, Garibi Hatao, in a negative, positive manner. Today, when we have slogans which are not only about us, but are about the globe or about the world. And I think the G20 movement was not just about the world looking at us, but us looking at the world. But at a point of time where disruption is now the new normal. I mean, the Hamas-Israeli issue which came up, if it hadn't been for Ukraine, if it hadn't been for COVID-19, etc., it would have shaken us a lot more. It deserves our full attention, etc. But now we have to negotiate the unknowns at a more rapid pace, and this includes calculations which are not just foreign policy, but naturally economic policy, domestic security, strategic, etc. So, in that sense, the challenges are for us, but they're for the rest of the world as well. But the government, in its vision, sees the timing. The timing now, Amrit Kaal, you could sort of see it any way you want it. You can see it politically. You can see it, in terms of philosophy or mythology, whatever you want. But it is a narrow corridor of opportunity. And life is about opportunity, striking the right between order, disorder, etc. So what is stacked in favor of us is a given. I know the demographics, the new purpose in the country, largely positive gaze coming in internationally, and that is extremely important because if the question is thrown on you, can you be the new China? Well, you can't be the new China for several reasons. One is, while we may have a similar scale, we don't have a totally benign international gaze from the rest of the world wanting you to succeed, because once you succeed you will be them. That doesn't apply to us because in some sense we are already them, in terms of how the West sees us, in terms of our political acceptability and pluralism, etc. So that gaze is not available to us. And that gaze had a very macroeconomic base. I mean, when the West was investing in China, they decided to look the other way when it came to environmental norms, labor issues, etc., standards. I mean, China just benefited from 20, 30 years of solid book orders, etc. And that's where the country flourished. We will not have that largely because that macroeconomic bus has left. But we have our own market, our own strengths. We are building connections. It's all about connectivity. I mean, IMEC was something which was filling the gap between our vision of the Indo-Pacific and our links with the West, etc. Right now, it's about connectivity, about setting the pace for more global initiatives. The Solar Alliance, CDRI, the One Future Alliance, the Global Biofuel Alliance. So this is now coming in sort of regular and very pleasing frequency. So we are engaging the world. We need to be on the high table to set standards, etc. Our numbers are good. This for the first time they say that 50% of global growth this year will be from China and India. I mean, these are two countries you seldom heard in the same breath, and I think that will continue. So, by way of introductory remarks, I will rest.
Very, very insightful indeed. And Secretary Krishnan, taking that thought forward, I think as top policy makers, one clear objective for any of you would be, how do you use the tool of policy making to bring a competitive advantage for the country, right? And I think, it's almost envious that the role that you're going to be playing at METI right now, given just the amount that's happening globally, whether it is on deep tech or it's on AI or it's on electronics, and making India a manufacturing hub and the vision of the Prime Minister around that. I think share with us what that broad vision for you looks like today as India's Secretary for METI.
I think what is most striking when you look at this sector and when you look at what it was, say, 10, 15 years ago till today, is India's electronics manufacturing sector had virtually disappeared post-ITA 1. And many brands which you had, Indian brands in the 80s and 90s, things that we grew up with, just vanished. The revival of electronics manufacturing in the last 5 years, I think, has been one of the most remarkable stories that we see. Prime Minister this morning, speaking at the India Mobile Congress, made this point, saying 10 years ago, 98% of mobile phones in India were imported. Today, 98% of mobile phones that are used in India are actually manufactured in India, and India has become an exporting nation for mobile phones, and that represents this transformation, so to speak. Now, why is this important? I think what we realize now is that technology is at the forefront of what is going to happen in terms of the Industrial Revolution 4.0 and all that's going to happen on the manufacturing side in the days to come. And as a country, we probably need to harness both elements of it. Use technology to go ahead, and at the same time, revive manufacturing simply because that's where the quality jobs are. We speak of already being the fifth largest economy in the world, heading towards becoming the third largest by 2030. But it's not just the size that matters. What matters also is per capita incomes. What matters is when there is growth, per capita income obviously goes up, and it is important to grow. And likewise, it's important also to deliver on better and more jobs and quality jobs. And that is the opportunity that electronics and technology really offer. And in that sense, the ministry where I am in right now, METI, probably represents that cusp where technology and manufacturing meet, and where both in terms of supporting what happens purely in the electronics sector in terms of what we use, the consumer electronics and other things that we use, but also supporting all other industrial manufacturing, whether it is in the area of medical technology, whether it is in the area of agricultural technology, any of those areas. What we bring to bear, or what this sector brings to bear, is going to be extremely significant. And all of industry, literally, with the Internet of Things and the kind of manufacturing which goes on, it's going to become really important. Linked to that is what is happening with emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and all of that. And the way that data is going to be used, the kind of computing capacity that you need in the country in order to tackle that data and tease out the advantages, the learnings from all of that, and apply it across sectors. I think this is going to be hugely exciting, and it's going to probably put India at a sort of a pole position. And that's the other point which was made this morning by the Prime Minister, which is that, we were earlier, right through the 2G, 3G, and 4G stages of telecom development, we actually took technology from the rest of the world. But by the time we come to 5G and 6G, we are actually in the forefront of creating this technology. And likewise, with many of these areas of emerging technology, we have the opportunity to be at the forefront of leading this. Clearly, there's a lot of effort which is needed. Clearly, we need effort on behalf of government in terms of setting the right policy, but we also need industry to come together with us. We need academia to produce the kind of research and the kind of human resources with the kind of skills that we need to lead this revolution. So I think, and the kind of investment that needs to take place in research, not just from the government side, we have the NRF and various other initiatives. I was pleasantly surprised to find, I'm a month old in the ministry, but I was pleasantly surprised to find that we have a large budget for research, and that's the budget which there is a lot of competition for, and we keep needing more money. And I think that's a good place to be in. But likewise, it needs to be complemented by what happens with industry. And honestly, our leading IITs and others are doing a lot of interesting work, a lot of interesting research across the IITs, Indian Institute of Science, IIITs. A lot of it needs to spread to tier 2, tier 3 institutions as well. So that kind of critical mass which we need is developing and will need some more effort to develop. When that happens, I think we stand the prospect of being an unbeatable power, and the rest of the century really something that we can look forward to as India's century.
Thank you, Secretary Krishnan. I think very broadly that sets the base for especially in the area of technology and manufacturing, and how do we marry the two. Secretary Verma, I think what's interesting at this point, and we heard how The objectives are very clearly laid out. For instance, as a venture capital firm that has brought in about $9 billion into India and the region, we are super excited about the opportunity that India today presents, right? We look for new trends, we look for emerging technologies, and we think there's a plenty happening. And very often, our partner Rajan Anandan talks about the twin engines of opportunity and growth that we have. And by twin engines, on one hand, you have the whole domestic opportunity where there's tons of innovation happening, as Secretary Krishnan said, some of that innovation coming out of research institutions like, say, IIT Madras, or innovation that we're seeing, young startups, young founders that we back and we invest in, and we're seeing plenty of that come out of India. And then there is that India domestic market where there is just so much scope, and because we have such a strong domestic market that we can sell to, that we can take advantage of. The other engine, of course, is India to the world, where Indian companies are building for the world today, where we are setting the stage to be that one, whether it is across fintech, SaaS, edtech, we are really now becoming the innovation hub of the world. My question to you, Secretary Verma, is that just like we see these twin engines of sorts, there's also a dichotomy when it comes to, in some ways, geopolitics and policy making. The dichotomy really is, on one hand, taking advantage of this global trend where India needs to be increasingly integrated in the global world, but on the other hand, there are national interests that need to be protected. There is an element of, and protectionism is not seen in a nice way, but there is an element of protectionism that every country is following, and perhaps rightly so, because policy making is now becoming a tool towards addressing that. How do you try and address that dichotomy right now?
Well, I think the idea of protectionism sort of has run through the veins of every possible country on the planet and continues to do so. It's sort of reinvented itself. It's not a concern beyond a point. It does come up as a standard talking point sometimes, specifically on, let's say, European companies bidding for our public projects, and that they have, if the threshold is given, it's a 2 crore project or less, they can't bid. I mean, these are some of the instances where protectionism is quoted. I don't think beyond a point it sort of drags our conversation down in terms of economic cooperation with any of our key players. We do understand that the geopolitics has thrown in a lot of challenges today. You could, in a sense, see that from the 1980s onwards, till the financial crisis in 2009, 10, 8, 9. I think most of the decision making globally was based on some sort of economic rationale. Since then, because of the financial crisis, the COVID, the Ukrainian conflict, and now Hamas, I think the policy making is going to be geostrategically or geopolitically induced. You will find that will then reflect in policy making, in think tanks like your conversations, and then reflect in your numbers. So right now, while we are taking some satisfaction from the fact that on many indicators, or most indicators, we are back to pre-COVID levels in terms of economic growth, travelers, air travelers, etc. I mean, these figures keep coming up. It will have to be seen on how geopolitics, there's a lag. So within a couple of years, you will really know whether this de-risking, re-globalization, deglobalization finally had an impact or not. But since this is the kind of trajectory all countries are transitioning through, the question of protectionism will not have an edge as it would have had, let's say, a few decades ago. And we have to do what we have to do. We have 1/6 of humanity to take care of, and I think the world realizes that. And I sometimes, and since this is just a conversation, I don't have a piece of paper. I was telling the panel, I feel like a free thinker. I'm not holding government of India's position on issues here. There's tremendous flux. So, I mean, there's no script you're working on, and countries know that. Every morning you get up, you see, there's an issue here, something happened in Qatar, and you got to react and then combine it with your economic business policies, look at your diaspora, etc. So I mean, it's so much of a flux. I don't think protectionism is something, it's part of our body armor as such. So in that sense, we will do what we have to, and we have, in a sense, in G20, when we sort of brought G20 back, as some say, you took it away from the bankers and brought it back to real life for the sake of the global south.
Right.
Is I mean, you can talk about protectionism, but here we're talking about protecting the global south in a sense.
Yes,
So that's
that's
also
protectionism of
that's
different
that's
kind,
also
yeah.
protectionism of its kind. But so this is it. It's not really a stumbling block. It's everybody's kind of doing it, uh, but the countries also realize we are a huge market. We are the
Sure.
biggest free market space available, and this is what I tell. Since I handle Europe, I mean, this is the kind of opportunities, the scale. I mean, you may be a fancy, a smart alecky, sort of holder of an algorithm in Europe, but you need scale, you need market that's available here. So in that sense, we are a fantastic attraction. Even if uh, for example, Europe would like to see you in their image.
Right, absolutely. Yeah.
But we will be what we are, and whether it's protectionism or how we leverage our market space, how we leverage our so-called non-aligned, largely generic non-aligned, strategic autonomy. So these are I won't say cards, but these are our intrinsic beliefs and strengths, and I don't mean it in the idealistic sense. I mean it in a very realistic.
No, absolutely. And I'll maybe take forward the word de-risking, as you called it, because it's true that protectionism in some ways is not seen in the right light, but it's very important for every country to de-risk in some ways and also to build on its capabilities. You mentioned the point about India having that size and scale and that being our strength right now. At the same time, Secretary Krishnan, we cannot simply just bank on that, right? That is an inherent strength, but we are constantly thinking of how to leverage what could be our competitive advantage as a country. And I think two specific areas I'd love to talk to you about in detail are semiconductors and AI. Let's talk semiconductors first, because that AI in some ways is something that the world is super excited about, and it's an opportunity that has opened up almost overnight for everybody to consider in a different way. But we come to AI in a bit. First, semiconductors. I think there the government has a well thought through vision, strategy, and plan, right? It is clearly an area where we need the Atmanirbharta, so to say. Share with us what's going on there and why you think India has this big opportunity around semiconductors. And I'd love to mention here that, as a venture capital firm, we've invested in two very, very interesting semiconductor companies that have come out of IIT Madras, and we could have never found those candidates had it not been for the government's effort. So this is classic public-private partnership and the kind of effort that has gone into research institutions and the models that have come out of there, which are fantastic and creating interesting opportunities.
Okay. Just before I go to the issue of semiconductors, you were talking about the issue of India being competitive, and I think we need to keep that in mind. And just to carry that example of mobile phones we spoke about, saying that we are producing 98% of what we need in India right now, which is very good. Then the scope for growth of that market is limited. And if you're going to really look, and that's something that Mr. Virat Bhatia sitting next to me will undoubtedly endorse, that if you were going to look to grow beyond this, then you have to look at export markets. And if you have to look at export markets, you have to be necessarily competitive. And if you have to be competitive, then you have to have a significant portion of the rest of the ecosystem which comes into the country. And one important component of the ecosystem, especially in terms of component manufacture for electronics, is semiconductors. So that's how I'd like to come around to where we stand on semiconductors. And really, this is very, very exciting space. And oftentimes we think of it as it's just silicon chips, and silicon chips are put together, and that's the story. It costs a lot to invest in that, and why should we do it? But it is really India's moment in a sense, and policy making has been extremely courageous and brave in this and bold in this area. I recall I was part of Government of India 2005-6 when we were actually trying to see whether Intel would set up in India, and all that it fell apart on was an outright grant of about $100 million at that point. And that was something which was difficult to countenance and difficult to consider. And today we have a semiconductor mission for $10 billion, which will support a range of players manufacturing a variety of things in that segment. And I mean, of course, the big success story there has been Micron. The groundbreaking has happened, and their ATMP plant is in the process of being set up. What we have promised is unprecedented in terms of pari passu fiscal support, which has not been done in many other cases. ELI doesn't work in the same way. The government is actually participating in the risk of which a private company is taking when they are making such a large bet, which is uncharted waters really, and which we are very boldly doing, and I think that's a very significant move forward. There are more there is more to be expected in that area. The Indian Semiconductor Mission is working hard on the remaining leads that it has to take this forward, and this, in a sense, is the cornerstone of whatever we are attempting in the electronic manufacturing space. The electronic manufacturing space, of course, has many other parts of this, but this kind of goes to the root of it, or really to the, literally where it all emerges from. So in that sense, we are trying to capture the entire chain from the top to the bottom. So this goes to right the beginning point of where that chain starts. And clearly there are challenges, but I think what attracts a lot of people is increasingly the possibility of the market being in India and the talent being in India. And what we often don't realize is that a lot of the design work, even today, on a lot of the chips actually takes place in India. The IP may be owned elsewhere, but the design takes place in India with Indian technical people, with our engineers. So clearly the possibilities here are immense, and this is a segment we absolutely have to get into. We are late coming in there, but
but there is a plan.
I mean, my Hindi isn't great, but as they say, "Dev se aaye, magar durust aaye." So I guess we will.
That's great enough, actually.
Yeah. So, but I think the idea that we are there at least now in the semiconductor space is very interesting. And the other point on semiconductors, which we should realize also, is that increasingly they're becoming very specialized and very niche.
Yes.
And in that space, I think the possibility of today, I was actually having a very brief discussion with former IIT Madras director, Mr. Bhaskar Ramurthy. Yes. So he was also pointing out, saying that onto the same chip, you can now implant a variety of applications. Some of it is electronics, some of it is photonics, some of it is something else. And some of it relates to communication, some of it relates to a variety of other operations. So he says that is a space where nobody has gone into yet, and that is an opportunity which India really has to exploit. And that, in certain cases, may not be large-scale production, maybe smaller scale production, but would be very niche and very high-value addition. So there are immense opportunities in that sector, and I think this is a space that we should continue to watch over the next 6 months or so. More things to it.
So when Secretary Mehti says that policy making in semiconductors has been bold and courageous, and says on semiconductor, der aaye, durust aaye, that's music to our ears. I want to quickly jump onto AI here, Secretary, because AI is, I think, today a buzzword. Everybody is talking about it. There has been a milestone moment, so to say, in terms of the journey. The kind of models that we've seen come out from last year has brought the world's attention on AI. And we know that India wants to be ahead in this party in some ways, right? We don't want to be late to the to the AI party, maybe the way we were late to the semiconductor party in some ways, right? But at the same time, what's the role the government can play in enabling AI today? And I think it's being seen in two parts. One is, of course, the infrastructure, right? You do need compute capacity. You do need to set up the GPU clusters. And we understand that your ministry is thinking along those lines on how to play the role of the enabler in the AI ecosystem so that, our young startups, our big tech companies, everybody can ride on that and never feel constrained that there's an infrastructure bottleneck for AI growth. On the other hand, there is a rather interesting debate around the world on regulating AI, the risks that it brings with it. How do you bring about, will India take that lead in AI regulation? And that's where I'd like Secretary Verma to also step in on the regulatory part, because there's a lot of geopolitical conversation. But first, on government as an enabler for AI.
I think in the AI space, we are in the process of extensive consultations across government and in certain cases, even with international parties. It's something which was also discussed in the G20. So let me sort of quickly look at what we are, let me kind of try and describe quickly what we are trying to do across about 4 major pillars of activity there. One is clearly in the compute capacity. Initially, we were thinking that we would do a viability gap funding kind of support for a AI build out in the GPU capacity that is required. But subsequently, given that many private sector firms have already gone ahead and they are in the process of contracting GPU-based compute capacity, we just believe that probably the better way to go about it is to actually do a kind of assured market support where this capacity is getting built so that it is made available to researchers and to MSMEs and startups for their work. And in addition, for the government itself, under existing programs like the National Supercomputing Mission and so on, build out a portion of sovereign AI capacity, which again can be shared with researchers, and it is primarily meant for researchers, but can also be shared with startups and entrepreneurs. So that's purely on the compute capacity build out.
But time is of essence, Secretary. Any timelines you have in place? Because I think everyone's waiting in the wings.
You see, I think the point there is that the policy, or rather our documentation should be out in a matter of probably a couple of months. I mean, we can't really afford to wait beyond that. And the build out really needs to happen in the next 18 months to 24 months. I mean, some of this has to happen that fast, otherwise it doesn't make sense. Then the other part of it is the work on foundational models which are specific to India. Right. There is a concern that when you use large language models which are not developed in India, it gives you, it doesn't give you the kind of knowledge or the kind of, there are inbuilt biases and inbuilt prejudices which go into that. So we really need to build out many of those models in India, and we have institutions already working in that space, and that'll get covered under this overall umbrella as well. The third part of it is really how do we manage the data piece? And, given that we have all this population scale data stacks available, we could be, or we will obviously be, a huge attraction in terms of just having this data. There is a challenge with the databases we already have. Clearly, they may not have the kind of cleansed data, and a lot of personal data will need to be anonymized before it gets used. And that becomes an important chunk, and there is a regulation piece there as well, which needs to work. So that is the third bit where, again, India will have a decisive advantage, provided we play that game in an appropriate way, and we make sure that we are ready to use our databases most effectively to train the models that get built. And the last piece is actual use cases which researchers and others build so that the benefit of doing all this reaches the people it's intended to. The intent right now is to identify about 10, 12 areas where we can use this: agriculture, healthcare. These are some obvious examples. Even in the scientific space, they can be used extensively. So all of that is the next bit of what needs to be done. So these are the 4 major pillars on which the government intends to work on AI and build it out. We intend also, that India looks to be very much part of the global thinking on this. there's a huge opportunity coming up. The Global
GPAI.
Partnership on AI, GPAI, is the summit meeting is in India in December, and India will be taking over as the chair. And there's a way in which we can actually guide that narrative. We're also taking part in the AI Accountability Summit, I think it's called, in
UK.
which the UK is hosting on November 1st and 2nd. And some of the contours of this will emerge
Sure.
as we go along there. So,
And I think that's the point I'd love Secretary Verma to talk about, because there is global cooperation around topics like AI now. The UK summit that he talked about early November, GPAI, you talked about many alliances, whether it's the Solar Alliance, the CDRI, One Future Alliance. I think the one that is getting a lot of attention is the one that will happen in December with GPAI. Secretary mentioned data being an advantage to us, right? And of course, data being the new oil, or data being, in some ways, even a tool to have us as a global power. And you've talked about our size and scale, and the size and scale of data automatically is a part of that. At the same time, how do we leverage that better when we have these conversations, And geopolitically, I think that's become even more significant right now, that we're seen as someone who's doing the right thing on regulation. There is a lot of jostling going on who will lead the way on AI regulation. Europe always wants to set the tone for any regulation like GDPR, and on privacy regulations, it's Europe taking the lead. Once again, on AI, of course, China's already gone ahead and done a lot of work. But what we want to understand is there a thinking of India doing things the India way again? That we want this the third way or the India way? And do we want to be that global leader setting AI regulations? And I think, Secretary Verma, what I can tell you is that what is interesting is that normally most sectors, and especially for us public policy professionals, there is always a conversation around how you don't want to be regulated, right? Because you feel that the more the government stays away from any sector, the better it always is. However, in AI, there's an early realization, and it's one technology where, be it big tech or be it startups, everybody actually wants certainty. They want regulation, they want an understanding on how this will play out, because you'd rather build out a sector and an industry with certainty around regulations than not. So with that backdrop, your thoughts?
Let me respond on an observation you made, that government should keep out of regulation and technology, etc. I think that's a live topic. If you look at one of the most respected economists of our era, Darren Acemoglu's, I think it's one of his latest books on how he talks about deployment of technology. And it's only when the government has played a sensible role in it that the deployment has served the interests of the larger masses. To link that with our DPI, what happened in G20, personally for me, one of our biggest takeaways was, I think, the 6 outcome points of the digital economy ministers meeting. And those 6 outcomes are essentially, suggesting to the world, ये हमने किया है DPI के साथ, and this is what the world can adopt. These are 6 solid standard setting or depository related issues. So, this can be seen as, I wouldn't say positioning, but since we are interpreting it as a public good, while taking a leading role in this process of DPI and sort of, making it accessible, available largely to the global south and even to the developing world, because there are gaps in the developing world with regard to how we have been able to use DPI, but is absent in more developed theaters. The conversation is largely about being on the table. And as they say, if you're not on the table, you're on the menu. So we have decided we will not be on the menu anymore, we will be on the table. So DPI is a good example. With Europe, you would have heard that we have signed the TTC, and we had the first meeting of TTC, which is the Trade Technology Council. And that is dialogue mechanism which the European Union signed with the Americans just 8 or 9 months before they signed it with us. So that suggests a sense of confidence to discuss. And this TTC Council discusses very sensitive issues on on technology and innovation and standards and inclusiveness and accessibility, etc. So you can see that space for India, the Indian point of view, both for what we bring to the table because of our innate strength in these sectors, but also because the commercial outcomes and opportunities which come because of our size. So you'll find the same tune playing in our quad. You will find the same with the Americans. We have more than 80 bilateral mechanisms to discuss issues, and I think technology, cybersecurity, AI, very much in the center of that conversation. So increasingly, we are. I mean, some of you might know that the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy on Tech is a former diplomat, Amardeep Singh Gill. So, I mean, I'm just said that because he's a colleague and I wanted to impress you guys, but it makes the larger point that we are increasingly moving towards, the center of the conversations. Obviously, our takeaways will be different. Our reality is different. It will not be like the American, it would be like the European, definitely not like the Chinese. But we will bring to this conversation, because in many ways we also combine what in political philosophical term drives Western economies or polities. So the nation building process in many ways is similar. So while we share some very high ideals, our realities are different, and our take in any conversation in standard setting and AI and IT, etc., will reflect our position, because they may talk about the welfare state idea, but for us, I think that journey is just.
I wanted to bring in Bharat here to also add to the discussion. Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you, Shweta. First, Sanjay ji, I wanted to just recognize, it would be remiss for me to move forward without recognizing the incredible seminal work that you and your colleagues do every day for us. I'm not sure everybody in this room knows that India has one of the, by proportion of size and population, one of the smallest foreign services in the world, also by definition, one of the most efficient. I think between 850 and 1,011 officers, depending on the last report, which is basically the size of foreign officers, foreign office has in Singapore. Our border, our neighbor on the eastern border has 5 times as many. So if you take out 150 officers running the Delhi operations, then it's about 3 officers per country. And just look at the width of work that is going on. You heard Mr. Kant yesterday in a panel just before this, which leaves us. And so on behalf of the House, thank you to you and your colleagues for this incredible work. And I request everybody to join in a round of applause for the work they do for us. So that brings me to the question that I had, sir, which is, I know you would say we are ready and we can deal with this, and I know you've said this and Mr. Kant has said this, but I don't think any one of us was ready for what's happened in the last 5 years. From the pandemic to the one war and one semi-conflict on the most unfortunate situation on our eastern border, loss of our 20 brave hearts, which is rather unfortunate. And then all of the pressure and realignment that's happening around the world, all of it falls on your very brave shoulders and the small team. I want to ask you, since this is a group of policy professionals who represent the company's interest to the government and then seek government's intervention in areas of policy which impacts business and trade. I wanted to ask you on how do you think what's happening or happened in the last 4 years will impact our trade policy, because I know that the Honorable Prime Minister is also requesting the Foreign Office to focus more and more on that piece. Are we ready for it? Do you think we'll have to be cautious? And a linked question, and what is it that we can do better as an interested community to work, assist the government to take the national agenda forward?
Let me respond in a very modest manner to the heavy praise you landed on my ministry. Some of you may remember in the 80s, Rajiv Gandhi, when he was Prime Minister, he fired the Foreign Secretary summarily. What happened was, I think it was a public event, or in any case, there were more than 2 people present in the room when the then Prime Minister told the then foreign secretary, आप लोग क्या काम करते? You're not projecting India well and all. We don't have a positive image, and wherever I go, people need to talk about, not very flattering things, and etc. So the then foreign secretary told Rajiv Gandhi, he said, "Sir, I'm a student of science, and the reflection from the mirror, reflects the reality of the image." The next day, the foreign secretary was sacked. So the praise which you sort of so kindly have directed to us, that quality of that image has changed itself. I think we derive strength from the tremendous energy, the growth, the vitality, and there's so much positive news coming out. So it gives us, it gives us heft. It gives us heft, and being a diplomat for now 32 years, it was miserable. First few years was actually very, very hard. I think 1998 onwards, I think after Pokhran 2, things started changing, and every day there's something to be positive about. This morning, a lot of us do a lot of research and work, at least 3, 4 hours every day too. Financial Times has a very flattering article on the quality. I mean, it's flattering, but it on Indian whiskies. And if you are that's why this is a free thinking dialogue. It's not very sarkari. The quality of Indian whiskies is now outstanding. The other news item I saw, there are 22 feature films being released in the country today in 5 or 6 languages. Gujarati 3, Malayalam 3, the Hindi 4 or 5. Now, which country in the world would have this kind of bandwidth? So if you look at the OTT, I'm sorry, I'm digressing a bit, but the larger picture I'm giving here is बहुत कुछ हो रहा है, अच्छा हो रहा है, we are in the right space, and that's why the Foreign Office, the leadership we have, and trade. I can tell you, I can share in this room that a foreign service officer today is evaluated on 3 T's. The annual assessment on how does the officer or ambassador promote trade, tourism, and technology. That should sort of, and I remember I was ambassador in Madrid this was about 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, when the Honorable Commerce Minister said that we have to touch $400 billion exports in the next financial year. I can tell you, I was the most skeptical. I was telling my junior colleagues, "Kaise hoga? Delhi touched 300. We touched 420 or 419 that year. Now, last year it was 1.67 trillion was our total trade in goods and services. If you just look at the oil and gas sector, it was $250 billion. So clearly the embassies, but again, we can't be like the rooster who feels that because we sort of, said our piece in the morning, the sun rises. It's a very complicated. So even whether it's Invest India or Indian diplomatic missions or chambers of commerce, it's very hard to say where the credit should actually land. At the end of the day, I think it would land with our exporters who are actually exporting. But the trick is, I think there is still a lot of scope for us to get our act together in terms of how we project products. We need to celebrate our products. I think as Indians, I think we need to buy more in, and I don't mean it in the Swadeshi, very fact that our products are good. Reach out, promote your companies, not just companies, your service sector, etc. So all that has to be done along facing the reality of the high standards the Europeans are setting, the non-tariff barriers. I mean, that's a clever game, but we have to sort of, and that process is still on as we speak. So it will be challenging, but we can deliver. The manufacturing sector has to increase its share of the GDP. It has. I was reading that currently, as a percentage, Indian exports as part of the GDP, as well as Indian incoming FDI as part of the GDP, is more when compared to China. So clearly, we are becoming an outward-looking economy. We have to. I mean, that's not an option. And as an engine of growth, I think exports is something I think every foreign service officer has imbibed as the most fundamental deliverable, apart from the political aspect of his or her job.
Thank you so much. other comment and question, sir, is to you, Mr. Krishnan. It's universally recognized that MeitY is one of the most efficiently engaged ministries with the industry. It has a whole range of issues in which it engages now, even more so with 4 or 5 laws on the annual and rulemaking, which is going to impact our sector. And just as Secretary Sanjay said, that technology is sort of in the middle of everything. The Prime Minister just said 2 hours ago that the contribution to GDP of technology is insurmountable. It's just the single most important contribution. You have, sir, with in your new role, a relatively new role, $100 billion electronics sector, of which a quarter is now exports, $44 billion of mobile production, a quarter of which is now exports, $200 billion or thereabouts of software exports, 90+% of which is exports, and the whole digital infrastructure piece, which is now a new soft power building piece for us with the global south and also countries in Africa, etc. So with this incredible responsibility, also large number of exports and trade, given today's subject about Atmanirbhar Bharat, might I offer you a slightly bolder, braver definition of Atmanirbhar Bharat, something that our Eastern neighbor has done for 20 years while the world was looking away, as Sanjay ji said. Should that now for us mean that the world should depend upon us? Should we, for the next decade, carve out a plan for ourselves, which is not just self-sufficiency in Atmanirbhar Bharat, but nirbharta of the world upon India on key technologies and growth areas to increase our strategic leverage and margin of persuasion with the world?
And I said, rest of the century could eventually end up being India's century. You said it more directly in terms of what the implication of that could be. But if technology is going to be the crucial determinant of what happens in the days to come, in the decades to come, and we aspire to be at the cutting edge of that technology, clearly there is a greater global role that we are going to look at. Our growth cannot be only based on our domestic market, or that is a point already which we have discussed. So clearly we have to look at the possibilities of export in those sectors where we are extremely competitive and where we need to increase our competitiveness. So undoubtedly, I would say that we need to, again, as Mr. Sanjay Verma has pointed out, we don't have the same opportunity like China did when the rest of the world looked away when Chinese growth happened. Today, the issues relating to whether it's environment, labor regulation, or any of those are far more stringent and far stricter, which kind of constrain to some extent the scope which is available for a very rapid growth. But I think what it does on the converse is that the quality of growth is going to be significantly better, whether it is in terms of better paying jobs or whether it is in terms of growth which is better for the environment. And what we do as clean technologies themselves are in themselves an opportunity for growth, and that's another sector where India leads. And so clearly, I think we need to at least have that as a goal before us. It's not for anything that we are the most populous country in the world. We need to have the economic heft. We need to have the political clout, which comes from all of what has been happening in terms of growth. And there is no reason why you should not dream big in terms of what needs to happen. But we also need to be aware that it is a long way forward, and you need to keep looking at next steps in what you need to do and do them well so that we don't lose our way. You know, one should never forget that in 1900, United States and Argentina had roughly similar population and roughly the same GDP. And in 2000 or 2020, it's very important to realize where they are. So I think it's important that the potential is all there. We just need to get every inch of this step. There's a lot of hard work which needs to be done by the government, which needs to be done by industry, which needs to be done by all the players. There's no reason why we can't dream.
All right, I know we're running out of time, but we do want to open the floor up for questions.
My question is to Secretary Krishnan. I would like to know what are the challenges that are coming in the way of negotiating these deals with semiconductor companies? Because I've been seeing that there are a lot of talks around the negotiations going on for bringing in the semiconductor manufacturing companies, but the Micron is the only deal that is being materialized. The Foxconn Vedanta deal and the Intel and Tower deal, they are not really being materialized. So I'd like to know what are the challenges behind negotiating.
I think there are 2 or 3 challenges which are important. One is that, since there is a large amount of money which the government is also putting into this, while we are willing to take that risk, we also need to be sure that you're negotiating with parties which have 2 things. One, the right technology, and also the right marketability of their products, because we want the project to succeed. There's no point in sponsoring something which may not work in terms of not having the right technology or adequate financing to actually implement the project in terms of strength or to sell the products. So one part of it is identifying the right players. The second part of it is you also have to understand, this is a very cyclical industry. Right after the pandemic, there was a huge shortage of semiconductors and chips across, and it affected a number of industries, including the automotive industry and so on. At the same time, almost in parallel, there were huge commitments for additional capacity which were made across the world. And you would know that countries like the US and also the EU and others, for strategic and other reasons, got a lot of investment to be made there. And their CHIPS Act, etc., led to the creation of a lot of additional capacity or committed investments in that area, which then meant that for the largest companies or the companies which we would ideally have liked to have been in India, that was probably in terms of timing not the best time for them to commit to additional investments. So I think it's partly to do with timing and partly to do with the kind of companies that you want to come in. But I wouldn't sort of already declare that, this is something which hasn't failed. This is a hard slog because, you also need to remember that we are venturing into this space and it is a complex ecosystem. So you need to really convince potential investors that our ecosystem is capable of handling that and that we will find ways in putting the entire ecosystem together in the country. And if you've convinced one big partner like Micron to come in, then the possibility of convincing others is that much more likely.
If I could just supplement that very quickly, because the students here, there are only 4 or 5 companies in the world which does this. This is in the list of, shoemakers or mobile phone makers, which is sort of, 20, 30. Even there, actually, there are very few. And as we offer this subsidy in this scheme, there is the United States offering approximately upwards of 50 billion euro, upwards of 50 billion euros. There is Korea offering money. So there's this self-sufficiency piece everywhere, where very large subsidies being offered in several parts of the world simultaneously to only 4 companies. So they have to make those choices. It's not easy to just sort of have them come in. So it's very, very competitive now. It's just a fact.
We are into testing, inspection, certification because we touch across several products. I can tell that wire and cable exports are increasing. Solar modules are increasing. We have power and automation products increasing. And so Virat did mention about the electronic products. Now, the important question which I wanted to ask the Honorable Secretary here is that if we see countries where exports have increased, especially we are not talking about commodities, we're talking about the value-added products. We have seen the testing and infrastructure. There's a tremendous support from testing infrastructure because manufacturers will need prototype testing, developmental testing, and finished product testing. I think our humble request would be that how government is looking at bringing more and more private sector in participation of building up state-of-art testing infrastructure in the country, which can support manufacturing ecosystem across sectors, and specifically about electronics as well, but also into compliance. Because I think many of us, also Indians here, there's a lot of overlap in compliance. We need to open up this. We need to disrupt the compliance framework here in India so that it's in the interest of, electronics manufacturing in India. Thank you, sir.
I love the way you call it overlap and compliance. So I think it's a very interesting description. But on a more serious point, I think we are fully aware that there is a need to beef up the testing facilities which are available. The electronic manufacturing clusters project, which is implemented, the scheme which is implemented in METI, has a very strong component of the testing infrastructure being created. And I'm aware that not just in the electronic space, but even in other spaces, wherever there are Government of India programs of setting up these large parks, testing infrastructure is a crucial part of this. And also, I think with NABL and others, there are a number of private laboratories and other facilities and facilities available with academic institutions also which get this recognition. So I think across there is a emphasis on ensuring that testing infrastructure is created. Now, when it comes to the enforcement or compliance, now there are a number of agencies. BIS is an important agency which does this, and which is one of the things that we are increasingly insisting on. And particularly, it covers not just Indian manufacturers seeking to export so that your credibility is built, but also in terms of the imports which are coming in to ensure that they are of adequate quality and we are not being flooded with substandard goods which don't meet various tests. So that is a challenge of compliance, and that is something where I think industry really needs to also cooperate with government so that there's enough of the good to drive out the bad. I think that is the critical element. That's the way this overlap, as you call it, compliance overlap, can actually be avoided, and you can have clearly, dividing between where the good stand and where the not so good are.
I agree, that was very diplomatically put, the compliance overlap. We'll take the last question before we wrap up, yeah.
So, sir, I have a question, like how we can ensure that the proposed stimulus package under Atmanirbhar Bharat reaches all the segments of the society and it doesn't widen the income inequality.
I'll just give a brief answer and maybe Sanjay can supplement. I think I made this point in terms of, when you grow, it's also important that you deliver a lot of quality jobs and you train enough of your population to take those jobs. So it's really through that mechanism that, this kind of growth or whatever we do in terms of Atmanirbharta really translates into more welfare. Because ultimately it's about jobs. I mean, why is the government doing all this to support growth? They are supporting it fundamentally for creating more jobs. And why are they targeting certain specific sectors like technology, electronics, and a whole host of others? That also is to create, and manufacturing in particular, that is to make sure that you have more quality jobs. And that's what delivers, the bridging of the income. And skilling makes sure that anybody can aspire and can get into those jobs which provide them higher income.
I think very quickly, I think it's a little complex. If you look at it in traditional conservative economic sense, I think one example which strikes out is the fact that we are probably the only purely democratic country to have moved 400 million plus people out of multi-dimensional poverty index out of poverty. At the same time, we are also in a space because of the financialization of the economies worldwide, the gap in equity will seem a lot more because that is what financialization of economy is all about. There's more finance than the brick and mortar, the linkage, it may be a factor of 8 or 10, 12. But an average Indian is living better today than ever before. You get that? From the foreign policy perspective, what we see is, apart from increasing trade in goods and services, is increasing the access of Indians for studies and jobs overseas. We still are in a sweet spot, a demographic sweet spot for another 2 or 3 decades. We will also start, in my calculations, I think the fall in our population, the decline is going to be very steep. But we are still 3, 4, 5 decades away. On the other hand, in Europe and parts of, let's say, maybe Latin America, the reverse is happening. There is a huge demographic deficit, aging societies, etc. So for our people to get jobs there, to address the equity issue, because at the end of the day, you need jobs. You need jobs. At the same time, you need a very robust welfare model, which the government of India is now focusing on, and that is why insurance, health, employment, direct transfers. So these two, or accessibility for women particularly. So these are also indicators of inequity. So I think this is being addressed at several levels. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We have that, screen screaming at us that we're already 7 minutes over, but this has been such an engaging conversation that we feel we can go on and on. But thank you so much, Secretary Verma, Secretary Krishnan. I think I want to just close from my end before I hand over to Kaustav by once again quoting both our esteemed panelists, Secretary Verma here saying कि इंडिया में बहुत कुछ चल रहा है और बहुत अच्छा चल रहा है. I think that in some ways sums up. And then, Secretary Krishnan, as we just said, de rai durust hai. But I think this is India's moment. The world is watching India, and we have a great opportunity ahead of us to lead global growth, as they say. Kaustav, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Shweta. I think the session was a fitting conclusion to PAFI's AGM this year. On behalf of PAFI, I would like to thank the panelists, Secretary Verma and Secretary Krishnan, for joining us. I would also like to thank Vinita for setting the context, Shweta for moderating, and Shweta and Virat for moderating it. I think there are plenty of takeaways from PAFI which we'll work on and take the agenda forward. As India's truly on the transformation, India's transformation is truly underway, and I think technology and manufacturing, the new avatar of manufacturing, are going to be the key drivers taking this forward. As you mentioned, the government, industry, and academia and civil society will have to work forward, and this is a space where PAFI can work on. We are developing at a stage where the rules of the game are very different from the past models, and we'll have to chart our own path and protect our policy space as we focus on better jobs and improving the quality of life for our citizens. Once again, thank you.